Ames reading series. This evening we have with us Barbara Schmitz, who was teaching writing and English at Northeast Technical Community College in Norfolk since 1971. Barbara was born and raised in Plattsmouth, Nebraska, received her BA from Wayne State College and her MA from the University of Nebraska, Omaha. Her poetry has appeared in numerous magazines, including Poetry Now, Nebraska Review, and Wind, as well as in the anthology All My Grandmothers Could Sing. She also has 2 chapbooks of poetry published, Moonstone and Making Tracks. Barbara is co-editor of Elkhorn Review and has guest edited the literary magazine River Styx. Please join me in welcoming Barbara Schmitz. I might walk out here.
I have to stay right here and behave myself? Well, I'll try. Thank you for coming. It's nice to read in Lincoln. I haven't read in Lincoln for a while. I'm going to start with some poems, and I'd like to move into some of my newer things. I took a leave of absence from my job last year, and I spent the year writing and taking care of my kindergarten boy. And my fiction, it slipped out. My poetry is becoming more and more like fiction. And some of it I call a mutation. It seems to me to be kind of a combination of poetry and fiction, and it's a form I don't quite know what to do with, but I'm sort of letting the writing take its own course. I feel like I have to let it do that because that's what it wants to do. So I'll read a few poems first and then get into that. This is one of my poems that was in All My Grandmothers Could Sing, and I'd like to dedicate it to all the women here tonight. It's called There Are Some Women. There are some women, all brown-legged in summer, hair swooped back in a ponytail, in blue jeans or shorts, and it's the photograph you can't stop staring at, like a diamond catching the afternoon sun, and tiny reflections of the room. They stretch out bare toes, rest them on the backs of sofas, head thrown back in a perfectly natural pose, as though listening to some angelic humming, like grace just dropped upon them. It comes with their breath, as though summer had pitched a tent of blue sky calm over a favored rose, and they only nod there like a willow, all dancing green and unknowing. My next one is a fantasy for Mona Neihart, and everybody knows about John Neihart, but his wife Mona was a sculpture student chosen by Rodin to study with him in Paris, and you had to be very, very good for Rodin to pick you. And when she was studying with him, she read John Neihart's book of love poems called A Bundle of Myrrh, and she began a correspondence with him saying, "Dear God, please don't let him be married." And he wasn't, and he proposed by mail, and she came and arrived in Omaha on the train, and he had his marriage license in the pocket of his coat, and they got married and went off to Bancroft, Nebraska. And unfortunately, Mona put her work aside to take care of the children and support John with his work. And every time I see her sculpture, there's a real sad part of me for her, that part of her that didn't do her work. So this is a fantasy, if she could speak about that. I was imagining what she might say. Watching the children, sculptures in motion, always moving. If they would hold still, I could form them, shape them, hold them. They are like pages in my book, autumn brightness falling. John, he writes every day. Me, I watch the children. They are puppies, and it's nice to be so close to childhood. I can almost remember. But I have trouble thinking, and my life is like heat waves from summer tall grass. the days with Rodin in Paris, him so particular, every curve must be exactly right. All those days when sunlight would flood the studio. Here on the plains it seems like endless winter, no view of spring from our low windows. I see the glory fading like our worn-out flannel pajamas, and I, once bright star in dawn sky, have become a dull glimmer. It's not that I don't love him. It's there and deep and welcome, like, excuse me, rain on this cursed prairie. But his works grow longer and longer, and mine shrink to a little pile of hope, planned projects that are shoved to the back of the closet. I bring them out momentarily in April, but then there's the garden and canning, and John always in his study writing, turning out another story to support us. Who would buy them anyway, these children of my mind and hands, carving out my tears in stone? So that's for Mona. Excuse me, Matt. This is a poem for my mother, I say, but I think it's really for my father. But I haven't got guts enough to give it to my father yet, so I'll probably give it to my mother, and maybe she'll slip it to him. But after my father was sick, I was talking to my mother, and she was telling me how awful he was to try to do anything for her, to take care of, and nothing pleased him. And so this poem kind of came out of that. Mules. My mother lived with mules all of her life. I thought she must like mules, otherwise why live with them? But I think that was not the case. I found that she has been able to come to love them. Propinquity, becoming familiar with, grown used to. I think still she is not fond of mules, but having lived with them so long, perhaps she does not even know it. Now, most of the mules are gone to bray and stamp stubbornly in other people's lives, who may or may not like mules, who may not indeed even know they are living with them. And she has some relief. Her life is not so hard or noisy without quite so many mules. But the great mule still lives there, and kicks up enough dust while slamming into the door with his feet and shaking his head all the while, that she still has plenty of cleaning and fixing up to do around the place. So that's for the great mule. Eve is really one of my sheroes. I stole that word from Maya Angelou. She said she doesn't like the word heroine. It sounds like you're shooting up something. So she uses the word shero. And actually, Eve is one of the original sheroes. So I wrote this poem. Actually, it was a line in a poem about Lilith, but it sort of triggered me thinking about Eve. And the epigram is from Pamela Hadis's book on Lilith. And when Adam saw the sea by night, he sighed. Eve rose up, wrapping grasses and leaves around her voluptuousness, moving slowly in the black from the bark and branches to the beach sand. Mother calling to mother. Eve responds, Eve comes, her emerald green eyes matching the water. Both are warm. Mother to mother they shine, same green glow in darkness. Then in the light she dances, this Eve mother of ours, this whisperer, this pronouncer of the word. She is a chameleon, and now is clear dew, a mirror reflecting morning before the orange intrudes. The dance is barefoot on rocks and grasses. She is far from the sand now. She cannot see the rippling water. She conceals herself, deep in the green vines and brown branches. In the afternoon, she is sleeping, coiled, small, warm flesh ball, unafraid to drift away here. It is her world. Fragrant blossoms drop singly, white and scarlet, on her dream. So I thought I was done with Eve, but actually I'm not done with Eve yet. And one day this poem came to me. It's a little bit on the lighter side, but I really figured out why I liked her so much. It's called Eve. Eve did it. She did it. She did it even though she knew she'd be in a hell of a lot of trouble. She did it anyway. And she had to talk Adam into doing it, you know. She's the one that had the guts. Okay, a couple more poems. This is called A Mouse in the House, about a friend of ours that kept coming over and we didn't know what to do with her. She comes before Easter, her face cracking open to March wind and weeping, looking for the home she never had. She never had one. Can she move in? Stay the afternoon? Her back hurts. Her diet might help her, almost diabetic. She was abused. She moves slowly through the house, studying the pictures as if she were in some museum. Hands behind her, clasped. Lies down, gets up, opens refrigerator door, eating leftovers there slowly, fork in Tupperware container. Meticulous mouse, as if this nibbling will eat away the misery, eating away at her. And I've always had a fear of drowning, and I figured I must have drowned in another lifetime. That was the only way to explain my irrational fear. So when I was 40, I make myself take swimming lessons. I have jumped into the deep water, but that's about as far as I've gotten. So I decided I would write about drowning, all those times I drowned. So here's 3 stories about how I drowned. I guess this is a prose poem. 1. I drowned in another lifetime, blue-green water swirling over me, the awful gasping in the throat, water pouring into my lungs like peasants shoving their way into the palace. I had wanted so much to live to be old, to tell stories, to own beautiful clothes, and dancing on the stage, have people watch me. I was more wind than water, an alien to liquid energy. I flirted with its shimmering, but preferred the banks, or under an oak beside it. Such a fluke to drown at the beginning of a love affair, he unable to save me. It's better, I suppose, than boredom. The searing pain doesn't last so long. Okay, then here's another time that I drowned. I drowned in another lifetime, water rushing into my lungs like Cossacks into another village, counting like when I'd put groceries away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Chickens flying all over the coop. Feathers and squawkings. Who ever heard of such a mess? Little roll of fat around the belly. Such a beautiful summer afternoon to drown, to go under, to suffocate. No one who loves me enough nearby to rush into the waves. Black palaces, frames of moving light. And this is the 3rd time. Won't you come up 3 times? Okay. I drowned in another lifetime. Hair and clothes spread out upon the water, wondering what I came here for. What was my life supposed to mean? It wasn't so bad once I resigned myself, like a squirrel storing up bits of nuts for winter. My life didn't flash before me, but old pieces of songs. They'd change like a kaleidoscope of music inside my forehead, beautiful and sad love songs. I cried for all the lovers lost, the ones I could and couldn't have, for empty nights and lots of stars, and knowing everyone I ever loved must taste this bitter water, embrace it, take it in. So anyway, I'm still here. I haven't drowned. And this is when I wrote for my son when he was 2 weeks old. It's called Me and Eli. Part 1. Like a low-throated animal you growl, gurgling my milk like some kind of devil, eyes rolling malicious in your tiny head. Like a wishing well, your blue water eyes stare through me, your schoolmaster brow furrowed in concern. Wise old guru, you know all. Then you sweet angel smile and almost laugh, whole body flailing like a tractor gone overboard. Next moment, you're no longer around. His face kept changing. It's like he wasn't quite, it'd be different people every time I'd look at him. Part 2. The milk runs from Canaan, these hard breaths at your first whimper. My empty wound contracts as you feast with loud sucks. White and red nectars flow from all openings, mixing juices from our side-by-side bushes. Sweet berries we are, you and I. And part 3, he still wasn't quite all in his body yet. You're not all here yet. Body like a Christmas gift wrapped in gold foil, and IOU inside. Your face swims away after I feed you, and some old man comes there, frowning for a while. A young lover chases him gone, flirting and winking at me with glistening eye. In your basket, you turn back into a baby, making loud smacks, so we remember your wheel is turning, coming, making tracks. Okay, this is a rather new poem. It's sort of amazing when I write a poem these days, so I have to read it. It's about two lovers. I guess you'd have to have two. I don't know. Okay. He lives in a jail inside a hollow tree. She calls prayers up the trunk. They echo like lost birds turning south, but losing faith midway between fall and winter. He listens with half a heart. It's locked up somewhere pounding, and he won't tell ever who's got the key, who's got the key. He plays a big bass drum. She comes dressed for a parade, dropping rose petals and breadcrumbs, a flute in her pocket. Can we play together, she pleads. He doesn't answer, but goes on singing, eyeless and speechless, full of grief, a wounded soldier who's seen what he's seen. And I did a retreat over Christmas, and one day in the middle of the retreat I just picked up my pen and wrote this, and it's mostly a memory of being in Europe with my friend, but also about hunger. It's called Smorgasbord. Her suitcase was lost. We'd come from the American embassy where soldiers with machine guns guarded the bulletproof glass entrance. We had to show our passports, and they shook their heads over and over. No, nothing they could do. We went to a restaurant we saw from the street, the first one we came on. If we eat all this food, if we eat all this, we can dance like dervishes, howl like mares. We ate everything. It was Milan, but a smorgasbord. Yes, we nodded to the waiter. Yes, we'll have some of this and some of that. He was pointing to everything on the cart. It's going to cost us thousands of lira, she laughed. We didn't care. We didn't ask the price. We ate some of everything, ate up hunger. Okay, this is one of my mutations, I call them. It's a little story with, I think they're little songs in the middle of the story, and if I could write music, I think they would be sung. And it's a scene, again, a woman waiting for her lover to come and not sure he's going to show up. It's called Not a Talker. And maybe this is R-rated. I was just warning you. "Why is he so late?" she said in her special get-up. Took her a long time to decide what to wear after she hurried the kid along to bed. 3 stories? Yes, if you hurry up. Now, he had been sleeping for at least an hour. And then the song. He comes to her for sex, he comes to her for love, he comes to her for talk, for yeses, yeses, to who he is, was, will be, forever and forever. Amen. She wanted something casual, sexy, but not too obvious. She chose her silky gray running shorts, her t-shirt, sleeves and bottom rolled up, no bra. "Do you think I should wear a bra at work?" she had demanded of him. "Somebody said I should." He only smiled, didn't say nothing, didn't let go. Not a talker. He wasn't even very much around her. To get him to let go. He did in sex, was the perfect lover, did everything she wanted. She didn't even ask. "How did you know that?" she wondered. He stopped, smiled again. "I like coffee, I like tea, I like you, you like me. You're teaching me," he said. "How? How?" she wondered. Finally she realized, like a gulp of water. He followed every movement she made. His radar had her, timed her, made her move like that again and again and again. It was raining outside and she could hear firecrackers somewhere. Seemed like a long ways away, almost as far as the train whistle. "Woo, woo, waiting for you, chugga chugga, are you, my lover?" She looked at a magazine. Waiting. If it was over, why didn't he tell her he wasn't coming? She had called this afternoon. He said he'd be over. She tried to read Wordsworth's Intimations of Immortality. Fretted by sallies of his mother's kisses, with light upon him from his father's eyes, see at his feet some little plan or chart, some fragment from his dream of human life. She'd recently gotten into it again, but not now, tonight. It wasn't working. Finally a knock. He came in with the package under his arm. "Beer?" he asked, smiling. "It's 11 o'clock, she said. "Been working on my boat," he said. "Want to get it ready to go fishing." "But we only have tonight," she said. "It's just starting," he said, grinning. "Fishing is as good as sex." He ducked as she slapped at him. They both walked up the stairs. Nobody said nothing. Nobody cried. The night was quiet. The air was full of sighs. There is supposed to be some funny stuff in there. You know? It's okay to smile. Well, I can't disguise this. This is obviously a story, not a poem. And I think it's a political story. It's called The Prayer. Marla had the knack of choosing impossible men. When I met her, she was divorcing her second husband, a Hawaiian executive who was having affairs with airline stewardesses. She said later she guessed she shouldn't have divorced her first husband for playing around. Probably everybody did it, and she really loved him. She had a full-grown son and the most beautiful legs without a wrinkle or a line. She wore short jean shorts and sandals that laced around her ankles. I didn't like her at first because she wore bright red lipstick. Ooh, I thought when I saw her lying on a bench outside the old rented building where we had class. Ooh, who's that? But then it turned out she was from Kansas. 2 girls from the Midwest. We became friends. She was chatty, chattery, some said. But if you listened to what she said, you were soon surprised. She talked about books. She had read everything, and about Buddhism. She had lovely breasts, too. Marla was full-mooned, but not too full, brown and gorgeous all over. She must have been 38 or 39 when I met her. I never figured it out, and she told me right away not to tell anyone she had a grown son. I didn't. People would ask me how old she was. I don't know, I'd say, glad that I didn't, because I knew how much she didn't want me to tell. It was the second summer when we were at the Institute that Chuck entered the scene. We were staying in townhouse apartments, rented out for the summer by the school. She arrived from Hawaii midway through the first term. I met her plane in the Denver airport. Turns out she had to switch planes, and I just bumped into her by accident, looking to the left and the right, in mid-calf khaki pants, carrying a small suitcase, walking up the concourse. She spotted me, hurried over, and touched me lightly on the shoulder. It wasn't a real hug. We never really hugged. She moved into my room with me in the apartment I shared with a couple from Tennessee. He was a pre-med student, and she was his fiancée, never been out of Tennessee, and surprised by the things she saw at the Institute. "Wowee," she said the night I had them and some other friends to dinner. My guest wore a dress she had designed herself, split down the middle, so one breast or the other was always out, pointing to the tofu and peanut butter sauce or the brown rice on the other side of her plate. "What's the scarf for around the middle?" my roommate asked my company. "To keep the damn thing from falling off," the woman cackled. My roommates had agreed that Marla could move in. I was going to finish the first term and then stay a few weeks. Marla wanted to attend the second term, so she would start renting the room when I moved out. Chuck was the local dope pusher. Just marijuana and LSD as far as I knew, but I never asked him to elucidate on what he had for sale. He looked like Fidel Castro, and always wore a pork pie hat and glasses that turned dark outside. He was big with a huge wingspan. When he put his arm around Marla, she looked like a small woman. He must have spotted her right away. He began coming over more and more to visit, and then one afternoon she went off to the mountains with him. I started to get worried as it got later and later and they hadn't returned. Maybe he's murdered her, I worried, half seriously. She came in alone, flushed, took my hand in the kitchen and led me downstairs to the bedroom we shared. "Oh," she said, sitting on the bed, looking down at her hands, "I've finally done something foolish. I've been doing it all afternoon in the mountains." What did she want after such a confession, I wondered. "Well," I began, and she looked up. "Well," I started again, "you're lonely. Everybody's got somebody here. It's a sexy place. I wouldn't worry about it." I wanted to add, "Be careful, Marla. Be careful with him." But some prudence wiser than me stopped that warning from coming out of my mouth. I'm sure she would have just defended him. How nice he really was. They moved into the bedroom the next night, and I slept in my sleeping bag on the living room floor. I was a little peeved that they were doing it all day and all night under my grandmother's quilt, and then all my clothes were down there in the closet and the dresser. I had to knock on the door. "Come in," they said, both grinning from ear to ear, holding the quilt up to their chests as I came in, trying not to look at the bed, at them. "I need some clothes," I apologized. "We're in love," Chuck apologized back. I didn't believe him as I rummaged through the drawers, trying to find something reasonable and get out of there quick. "Oh, be careful, Marla," I'd pray, but I knew she wouldn't be, and she wasn't. He started to stay out late and come in at 3 or 4 or 5 in the morning with other street people he'd picked up in his nightly wanderings around the city. They'd barge in, turn on the light, drink and laugh around the kitchen table. I'd grumble and moan in my sleeping bag, rolling away from the light, but they wouldn't hear me or paid no attention. He'd climb into bed with Marla when they finally went home. "Oh, be careful," I'd think in the morning, in the adjoining bathroom, hearing the bed moving in a regular soft rhythm against the wall. Shortly before I left town, she came to me one morning, tear trails on her pretty brown cheeks. "What is it?" I asked, looking up from my breakfast of fruit and granola. $100 is missing from my purse," she said flatly. "Did you put it someplace else?" I asked first, not wanting to get her mad at me for bringing up the obvious. No, I didn't," she said, plopping down now suddenly in the chair beside me. "So, where's Chuck?" I said next. "He didn't come back here last night," she said. "And when did you notice the money missing?" "I had it yesterday. He must have gone through my purse about noon, after we got up and I was taking a shower." She hung her head. I finished my cereal, wiped my mouth on my napkin, and looked at her. "What are you going to do about it?" I asked, carrying my bowl to the sink. "Nothing, I guess," she said, her head still bent. "Oh, Marla," I said, putting my arm around her the best I could while she was sitting there like that. "I wanted you to be careful with him." "I know," she said, patting my hand. "I know you did." About 2 days later, she came in and said she had seen Chuck on the street. "What did he do?" I demanded. "Nothing," she said, staring at me. "He just nodded at me, his hands in his pockets, and kept walking." "He knew you wouldn't do anything," I said, getting mad now, more at her than at him. "Why don't you turn him in?" She didn't say anything, didn't look at me. And finally I walked away thinking, well, that's the end of that, sadder but wiser and all that stuff. I thought I must have cooked my brain in the New Mexico sun 2 weeks later when I stopped in to see her on the way back from the Southwest. There sat Chuck with his feet up on a chair, grinning in the kitchen while she cooked for him. "Hi," he said, looking me straight in the eye. "Oh, Marla," the prayer began automatically. "You're so stupid. Be careful." "Marla told me she gave you her Hawaiian bikini," he said. "Yes," I grinned, "she did. I love it." "It's a good thing," he said, helping himself to a big scoop of guacamole dip, "because she's gained so much weight it'd look terrible on her." I was too shocked to say anything, but just stared at his grinning mouth, his ugly black beard with bits of avocado in it. "Want to see a picture of this chick who picked me up hitchhiking?" he said to my male friend who had come with me and didn't understand about Chuck, about Marla. "Sure," he said, trying to be friendly, taking his hands out of his pockets, reaching for the picture. "She just picked me up, man," he said, handing Steve the picture. "Took me to her place and balled me. Did everything to me. She was terrific." Steve held the picture, Marla turned Chuck's pork chop over, and I walked out of the apartment. "You are so stupid. How can you be so dumb?" was the prayer as I fled down the stairs into the parking lot, trying to breathe, trying to see, trying to keep from screaming. Marla wrote me a letter a few months ago from her condominium in Angel Fire. She said Chuck had shown up there. He had driven her new pickup on empty as long as he could to help her figure out just how far she could go on empty. She added she just didn't understand it, but she'd do anything Chuck wanted. She'd have a baby with him if he wanted her to. I sat staring at the paper with her at the white paper with her ink marks on it, and noticed that the prayer had stopped altogether. It was no longer there. Okay. Would you come in? This is, I read some stories called The Short Short, where they're extremely short stories, like a page or two. And I thought that was a great idea. So this is kind of a short short. Doesn't have a name yet. Melba Rhodes was sitting on her toilet, lost in a daydream. She was remembering her old boyfriend, Hank. What a lover he was. She was remembering the one time they were making love in his attic, among the musty smells, old trunks, cobwebby windows, and old coffee cans. He had lifted her leg so she was wobbling on the tiptoes of the other foot. She felt like a large, graceful bird, swaying to his pulsing rhythm. She hummed to herself, her eyes closed, joyful at the memory, feeling a little sad at the loss. A funny clank made her eyes pop open. There in her bathroom stood a man dressed in a green coverall, blonde hair, medium height, unscrewing a light bulb in the track lighting above the vanity. Who? What? Melba sputtered, grabbing her pants, not remembering her mother's well-rooted training to wipe carefully and wash thoroughly. "Oh, just stay there," the man said quickly. "I'll be done here shortly, and then you can go on." "Go on?" Melba echoed, glancing at the still unflushed toilet. "Yeah," the man grinned, snapping his gum. She hadn't noticed he'd been chewing gum. He screwed a soft pink bulb into the socket and began unscrewing the next green globe. "Who sent you?" Melba demanded now, pants up, standing beside the still unflushed toilet. "What do you mean?" he asked, not looking at her now as he screwed a soft lavender bulb into the next socket in the panel. "What are you doing here?" she nearly screamed, getting rather hysterical. She wanted to flush the toilet, but couldn't quite bring herself to do it. "I'm adjusting the scene," he said. "What? What?" Melba screamed at him. "Adjusting it," he said, while he worked now, replacing the last harsh orange globe with the same soft pink. The panel now alternated with soft pink and lavender bulbs. "Here," he said, turned and smiled, flicked the bathroom light switch. The room was transformed into a dreamy gauze of softness. Melba thought of angels on clouds, cotton candy, little girls' ruffles on a canopy bed, lovers walking softly. "Like it?" he asked. "But," she sputtered, "right colors, isn't it?" he demanded, hands on his hips. "For what?" she asked, finally drawn into it despite herself. The man was persistent about his work. "Right colors for a daydream about an old lover, right? But who—" "They call me the adjuster," he said, picking up his toolkit, walking out of the bathroom and the door of the apartment without looking back. Melba still didn't flush. That was supposed to be kind of a joke. Okay. This is a story about a monk. I just noticed there's a lot of sexual stuff in these stories. I don't know what that means. You can figure it out. This doesn't have a title yet. The wind was blowing at the monastery. The wind always blew at the monastery, and the monks went about their business, up at 4:30, dawn vespers, breakfast in silence, then 1, 2, 3 of them into the carpenter shop, 4 and 5 went into the garden, and 6 to clean the latrines, praying silently, deliberately keeping their minds on their business. Relentless. The wind blew even in midsummer. In August, the wind was hot, and it was not so easy to concentrate. The wind blew up memories, memories of old reasons, old pains for Brother Al. Albert had always been celibate until he went to the Psychology Institute. The abbot had agreed to his training, studied the request thoughtfully, running a hand through his gray hair. It would probably be good for Albert. He had a natural talent for helping people, healing. He had seen another monk literally stumble over Albert at a monastery celebration after a little wine and begin pouring out all of his sorrow. Albert caught it like the communion chalice, beautiful, shining, open. His generous nature was his true natural talent, thought the abbot behind his desk, rubbing his tired eyes. He'd talk to him about it. Albert, he mused, after he had called him in during the afternoon quiet time. And Albert now sat, blond, deep-eyed, mostly erect on the chair in front of the abbot's desk. "Do you want to do this?" "Yes, very much," Albert answered straightforwardly, shifting around a little in his seat. "Yes, I do." "I think then I shall approve it," said the abbot, pushing his chair back and getting up to walk now in the small space behind Albert's chair. "But Al," he said, leaning toward him slightly, resting his weight on the back of Albert's chair. "There is one consideration." "What's that, Father?" he asked now, looking intense. Albert the Intense One, they called him, the other brothers. He thought about things deeply. Maybe too seriously, the abbot thought. He could use a little lightening. Yes, a touch of humor, thought the abbot, was what was missing. Albert needed to make a joke once in a while. But now he saw that the young man was waiting for what he was going to say, looking anxious. "Just a consideration, Albert," he said, now coming back to it. "Yes? What is it?" asked Albert, getting impatient now. If the abbot was going to put conditions on it, like he sometimes did on forages out of the monastery, he'd just as soon forget it. "That you might disturb your tranquil celibacy you seem to have arrived at here." Albert almost smiled. Was the abbot reading his mind? He had, when he allowed himself to, which wasn't often, rather been enjoying the idea of, how should he phrase it, putting himself in the path of temptation. He saw it as a challenge. He knew he could resist. And besides, he was longing to talk to women. Sometimes he wanted the softness of their perception of things. Only men's view of the world was to him often blunt and harsh, too sharp. He longed to blur the edges a little bit sometimes, to blend the solid lines into more rounded shapes. "Ah," he said now, speaking slowly, "I have thought of that, Father." He pushed his hair back with one hand and leaned forward on his chair. "I believe I am prepared for that. I haven't repressed my sexual feelings here, hardly ever. I've let them up, acknowledged them, and I feel like I've been able to let them go." "But Albert," the abbot said now, moving in front of him and putting a hand across his brown robe, resting it finally over his heart, "you didn't have a chance here to act on your sexual thoughts or feelings that you let come up. At the Institute, there may be, I think it's real opportunities." It's cut off. Albert looked shocked. He hadn't really considered that. He hadn't expected a real encounter. He nodded now and gulped. "Okay," he said. Too quickly, he thought. "Okay, but I still want to go." "I trust your honesty," said the abbot. Now there's a little gap. I have to somehow get him there and get him into that. So it's going to be a little bit more here in the middle of the story. But just take a little leap. When Susan walked in, Al began to pray. She was dark and soft, and Aphrodite. And then he didn't care. "Disturbing my tranquil celibacy," he'd snort to himself. "You bet I want to disturb my tranquil celibacy with her." He didn't care about the long nights of prayer in the chapel where something would happen. He'd emerge exhausted in the morning, barely able to follow the smell of coffee to the kitchen, but transformed, a stillness that knew just how to be. Breathing would be enough as he'd wash the dishes, mop the floor. He knew he just had to be there, like a tree, breathing. Now he didn't care. He was willing to toss it all into the furnace raging inside him. All the years of practice to let go, find a center, be content. He would sell his soul to the devil if the devil would only come. Al was ready. "For one night," he'd chant in his head, I would. Susan said early in their group work that she was frustrated sexually in their marriage. She talked about it easy, gulping back a few tears. It had been wonderful in the beginning, lots of heat for each other. She wasn't sure what happened, she said, shifting in her seat, looking around at the group, at all the wide eyes and open faces. Probably gradually, but she had noticed it more or less suddenly. She had started feeling like an animal, a she-cat, she said, now gesturing her hands up in the air, on the prowl. Everybody looked good. She noticed several people looked shocked. Well, not everybody, she laughed, but I started to look around at men's bodies and notice men's bodies. Albert's heart leapt up and stuck in his throat, and he turned away quickly so no one would notice his face go red. I want her, was his prayer as he lay in his bed, his room a few doors down the hall from hers, not sleeping. I want her started to go on all day long in his head. What? He'd have to ask when he'd become aware that someone was speaking to him. What's the matter with you, Albert? His friend Tom asked finally. Can't be homesick for the monastery, are you? He chuckled and poked him in the side. Tom was tall, blond, sad-eyed. He was having marriage problems, too. You don't have sexual relationships to worry about. Life for you must be rather simple. Albert gulped. He wanted to tell Tom. He felt the closest to him of anybody there at the Institute, but the words needed a hydraulic lift, some mechanical device besides mere voice box, lips, and throat. Albert shook his head and shrugged. I haven't been sleeping right. My mattress isn't comfortable. Maybe they could trade it for you. We're going to be here 3 more weeks. Albert tried to keep his face from twitching. 3 weeks? Is that all the time I've got? Inside his mind, he was running to Susan's door, beating on it frantically, screaming at the top of his lungs, You've got to let me in. Oh, Susan, let me. I want in. Want to meet for lunch later? Asked Tom, stopping by the room where his group was supposed to meet. Yeah, later, said Albert, figuring out what Tom had said, even though he hadn't heard it. He turned the corner and bumped straight into Susan. Oh, he moaned out loud, even though he didn't want to. He started laughing and hiccuping. Are you all right? Did I hurt you? Is something the matter? Susan asked, laughing and looking serious at the same time. No, yes, Al said, looking and looking at her, his eyes so wide and unblinking, Susan was frightened. Come on, Al said, taking her hand, leading her down the quiet hall. The groups had started. A quiet buzzing of voices could be heard behind closed doors. They walked quickly through the park, beside the mothers and baby strollers at the side of the fountain, past the Art Institute with the bronze copy of The Thinker, past the junkie stores and little groceries on the edge of the black neighborhood. Suddenly he realized he was no longer leading her. She was walking evenly beside him, holding his hand, lightly, but she was holding it, and he thought he could feel energy flowing from her to him, him to her. He didn't care, from somewhere. And they were hurrying, not speaking. He didn't dare to look at her. He was afraid he had finally fallen asleep and was having this wonderful dream. No one in the elevator at the hotel. They both leaned against the back wall, relieved to be in the small, dark place. The door opened to an empty hall. He fumbled with the lock, clicked it shut on the inside, leaned against the door, and reached once more for her hand. Susan, he began. I know, she said, stopping him. I'm a monk, he said. I don't want to interfere with that, she said now, staring at him like he had stared at her before. Back there, when was that? You're married, he said. She nodded. The wind was blowing so badly today, Al knew he would go crazy. Maybe I could just send a letter, he reasoned, straightening up from the row he was hoeing, wiping the garden dirt on his jeans, trying to wipe the tears in his eyes and rubbing dirt in them. He knew he had gone through a red light. His, hers, her husband's, the Abbotts, many of them. He had been heedless, he had speeded, crashing into lives, wrecks that couldn't be fixed. And now he should stop. The chase was over. The Abbot had said he couldn't go back to the Institute, and he agreed. Of course, Father, he repeated, as the Abbot paced in front of him. Of course, I agree, you're right, he almost whispered in reply, when the Abbot said quietly but firmly, You leave me no other alternative, Albert. The Abbot watched now from his window, arms under his robe, as Albert hurried from the garden. It'll take time, he nodded to himself, but he'll recover. Recover and be a better monk because he's had that experience. Once in his room, Albert grabbed paper and pen out of his drawer, beginning a letter. Dear Susan, I know it's wrong for everybody, but I must see you. Okay, I don't want you to die sitting on those chairs, so I'll read one more little story. This is a story about somebody going into labor. Doesn't have a title yet either. There was a John Neihart poem her friend Janet had sent her, one about the child sucking the mother's breast, mother and earth, something like that. It was supposed to be an encouraging gift. It scared the hell out of her. When she'd gone into labor Thanksgiving night, carefully putting the rest of the leftover pickled beets and hard-boiled eggs in the refrigerator. She had brought antipasto to her sister-in-law's. She went and picked up the poem. It was supposed to give her inspiration, only it made her afraid. She finished putting things in her suitcase, mostly books and notebooks. She took a sketchbook, too, because she was taking an art class and thought maybe she'd get some ideas for projects. Then she picked up the poem. She stood in the upstairs hallway reading the poem out loud to Henry. Her voice cracked and she began to cry. "I don't want to take care of a baby 24 hours a day." Henry, who had been sitting at his desk getting some things together, got up and came to her. "Geez," he said, "I don't either." "What are we going to do?" she wailed. "I guess we're going to have to figure something out," he said, his arm around her shoulder. She sniffed now, put her books in her suitcase, and walked twice down the hall. "Shit," she said. "This isn't supposed to happen until you go into transition." "What's that?" Henry asked, his stuff now in his backpack. "This feeling where you're going to get up and go home and not have the baby. But the hopelessness of it all because there's no way out of it. You got to have the baby, but you can't. You don't want to. You don't know what you'll do with it when you have it." "Transition?" Henry asked now, standing. He was ready to go. "Yes, transition. You know, we studied it in Lama's class." "I guess I don't remember," he said, walking to the door, a silly, sweet smile on his face. She assumed he was kidding. "Ay, ay, ay," she said, "you're my coach." "I got down all that time breathing," he said, grinning, holding up his watch. He stuffed a big bag of caramels into his backpack out of his bottom desk drawer. "Now I'll get my coffee and I'm ready." "I guess you are," she laughed. "I don't know if we need to go yet." Just then the phone rang. "Oh, Mackie," said Henry. "Yeah, we're in town." "Yeah, we're going to be in town." "Well, sort of, I mean, we are. We're getting ready to go to the hospital. Why don't you bring your cameras and come up?" "Oh, yikes," she said. "I don't know if I want a communal birth." "I thought you were thinking about it." "That was early on, about 3 months, when we bought all those birthing books in Boulder. It was all romantic and wonderful then. Remember all those books?" "I remember," Henry smiled. "I couldn't eat fish then because I was thinking of all those stages the baby was going through." The doorbell rang. It was Bill. "Hi," he said. "I was just taking my mother home from Thanksgiving and I felt like I should stop over." "Bets is in labor," Henry smiled. "I thought so. I knew it." Bill slapped his thigh. "I knew I should come here." Bets smiled wanly. "Well, now maybe you can use an Uncle Bill," he said, going around behind her, pulling her chair out. "Now just sit down." Bets didn't know what else to do, so she did. Once she was seated, his expression changed and he wrung his hands. "But, well, maybe we ought to get going." "I don't think we need to go yet," Bets offered in the midst of a contraction. "They're 10 minutes apart. We're not supposed to go until they're 5 minutes apart." "I'll make some tea," Henry offered. Good idea," Bill and Bets said. "Well, now, Bets," Bill said. "Well, now, Bill," Bets said. He was not one of her favorite persons. Sometimes she found him amusing if she didn't have anything else to do and could just sit back and listen to his stories. She thought he was crazy. A liar, most certainly a crook, talked people out of their money for phony investments, or if they were real, overextended and lost it. He was Henry's friend. He was sort of goofy and lovable, Bets was thinking. Bill patted her hand. Well, well, we've got to take care of you." "Well, you are," Bets answered, resisting adding a second well to mock him. "Henry, where's the tea?" "Coming," he said, bringing a tray with cups, spoons, honey, and a teapot into the dining room and setting it dead center on the round oak table. It had been her grandfather's. They had found it in the basement of his house after he had died. Nobody really wanted the antique furniture. All of her cousins had modern houses. It fitted their rambling old 2-story with all their oak woodwork. All the wood was the reason they had bought this house, that and the fireplace. Henry had just this month blocked off the fireplace and installed a wood-burning stove. She didn't like the idea much, but realized all the heat was getting sucked up the 3-story chimney. Now, whenever they drove somewhere, all Henry could see was wood. "There's dead trees over there, and look at those," he would say, his volume getting louder and louder. "Boy, I wonder if I could get in there and cut those down." Betts laughed. He was such an extreme person. She rubbed her hand on a little spilled tea on the wood table. She loved that table. It had taken Henry one whole winter to strip and refinish it. Tender tears came into her eyes. He had gotten her into this. He was finally the one who said he wanted a child, a baby. She didn't know. She'd never be sure. She never understood why people wanted them. Changing diapers, feeding them, she didn't know what they got out of it. Actually, this table and the picture of her great-grandmother hanging in the corner were the reason she decided to go along with it. Who would get these things? They had no one to leave them to. Family things should be passed down, Betts reasoned. She guessed that's why she decided to do it. She supposed that was as good a reason as any, as she sipped her tea, more or less ignoring Bill, who looked like he might any moment bolt from his chair. She supposed some people just had them with no thought at all. She probably thought too much. "Maybe we ought to get going," Bill said when she looked over at him. "I don't think we have to rush," she said, although she had noticed the contractions were closer together now. Around 5 minutes, she thought, if she were watching the clock right. Okay, she said reluctantly. She reluctantly agreed, pushing her chair away from the table. "Let's go slowly, though, okay?" Bill and Henry nodded, but Bill rushed for her coat, grabbed at her bag, and stood waiting with the door open. And I left them there at the open door. Okay, I'd like to close with a poem about no bombs. It starts with a dream I had. We were all trying to make a seagull in the sand, but we all had to work together, and everybody had to be in the exact place so the seagull would flap. We are making a seagull over the sand. We must all work together, or its wings will never flap. Please, no bombs. There's already too much work here to be picking up burned bodies, rubble, and charred bone. It's hard enough to love ourselves, giving us food, the holy host to grow. It's hard enough to find some path through the trees without scratching our knees and being eaten by insects. Please, no bombs. We've got work to do in this garden. Take away your mushroom shade. Please, no bombs. We have a vision, American Indian, at adolescence, what we are to do here. The Hindus call it karma, working out past injuries, negligences, and mistakes. Please, no bombs. Children without eyes, mutants without hearts. Please, 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 no bombs. "We'll make just one more," says the president, the premier. "A missile will shoot 'em out of the air. Then we'll be safe for living. Please, no bombs." Statue of Liberty lifts her light in Central Park, Norfolk, Nebraska. All the swings are full of children. Like kids fighting in the mud, slinging clods until it gets really bloody. Well, he started it. Please, 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 no bombs. "Please, Mommy," says the baby when she brings bombs for breakfast. Lovers sleep only to open their arms, find bombs in morning. The artists are drawing phallic shapes, bruises around their eyes, seeing trees burning. All day I pace the foreign wastes and not a drop of water. All the highways, maps, museums, marbled sculptured limbs, daisies and roses, bricks, ruins of ancient Greece and Rome, vacuum cleaners, new socks, flash together in one last blast. Please, 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 no bombs. Thank you.